My name is Peggy D, and I'm here at the Norris Cultural Center today. They've asked me to come and talk about being an artist. My particular piece that is in the show, it is in the Cultural Center Vicinity show. I was 19 and I had never made art in high school. I never had any art classes, and I took a class at the Art Institute. And within an hour, I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So then I ended up with a BFA in painting. Now you have to remember there were 56,000 students down there during the 60s and early 70s because of Vietnam. And there were only about 15 people who graduated in painting. So I have been a figure painter for most of that time. That means that my subject matter is the human body. And the way I usually start a painting is that I look for a photograph that has a pose that just speaks to me. And then I put down a charcoal drawing of the figure on the canvas, and I usually start painting. And then as I paint the figure, it's almost a non-verbal thought process. I feel that the painting needs other imagery. And in this case, I brought in the imagery of the watermelon and the scythe and the spoonbills. And it took a while for that to work together. It's almost like I have to collage those different things and see where they have to be, how big, how small. And so the painting develops really a leap of faith. I think that's what a lot of painters have to do. They have to be intuitive. They have to trust that intuitive nature to lead them where it has to go. Sometimes I don't even know what a painting is about until way after it's completed. And this painting in particular was a bit of a diversion for me because I didn't develop a background. I let the birds speak for themselves. I used a yellow behind the figure and behind the birds and to create depth, which I couldn't do with some sort of a geometric perspective. I kept painting the color over and over and over again, because depth in painting on a two-dimensional surface can be created either by drawing it in some way that references space, or many, many layers of color will actually create depth. There'll be a feeling you can sit between the layers of paint. So that was something that I did in this painting. I have used crows, I have used other spoonbills in paintings. There are a couple other bird species that I've put in. I often have just different objects that I have either photographed or that I have references. Sometimes I kind of make them up. But I don't really make up the anatomy. The anatomy has to be right. You can work with different still life objects and attempt to capture their form. But with the body, if it's not right, the viewer just goes there and says, I don't know, that's just not it. I feel the most important thing is to just make the work. And the advice I would have for anybody who wants to be an artist is just keep the work going. Keep it going for as long as you can. Even if there's laundry, even if there's dishes to be done and dinners to make. I know that feeling, especially for women. We have such a hard time letting all of that go. But you have to keep it going, and that's when you really make strides. And it is, part of the history of art that the artists that kept it going for as long as they could. I don't think Michelangelo worried about the dishes. No, I don't think so. But a person like Monet, who everybody's familiar with, he would get up really early in the morning and pack up his wheelbarrow and go off on location and paint every morning. But not all day. He would come home for lunch, and then he would be home, and he would be in his gardens. He would be talking to anybody who was visiting him. But he did it for 40 years, where he packed up his wheelbarrow and went off on location. So I think longevity is really important if you're a painter or an artist of any kind. You've just got to have the confidence to say, this is important. I don't exactly know why, but I'm going to keep making the work. And there you have it.
I'm Carol Bayer, and I have lived in this area for 30 years. I have been married to John for over 50 years. He's still the love of my life. One of my other loves is painting, and I also love photography. In fact, art was brought to me by doing photography. I did photography for 30 years and love black and white. I took up painting when we moved here, and I really love all mediums, but because of the environmental disadvantages of oil, I chose acrylic. And acrylic suits me because there's less odor and there's less difficulty cleaning up, because when I paint, I get into it. Some of the things that I try to express in my paintings are movement as well as softness, and I find that I really like negative space. And the first thing with my first stroke is, where is the light coming from? And that I initially learned from photography, that you have to have a light source, otherwise the painting might be flat. So this painting, Moonbeams, why did I choose a moon? Perhaps at the time I started it, the television was full of space. The people who chose to go up in space and look at the Earth. And it got me to thinking about the shape, the wonderful cylindrical shape. I intentionally left the face of the moon off because sometimes I will enter a picture of a horse in the moon. Horse is my favorite subject because of the roundness of the body, and so moon, being that it's round, is another one of my favorites. I chose this picture with the help of my grandchildren. As I said, we've been married over 50 years. So we had a little bit of a family reunion, and I asked them out of 3 of my favorite paintings to choose one, only one, and everyone in the family chose this one. I have taught my children about art. I like simplicity, and I liked the flow of this. And so there comes a time when your brain says, less is more. And I decided to sign it and have it framed, and I never dreamed that I would be in this lovely facility at the Norris Cultural Arts Center. And again, I'm so appreciative. Thank you.
I'm David Bauer, and I'm the artist that made this piece. And I'd just like to say a few words about it. There are really 3 parts to the piece. One is the collage of the ducks and swans, which are made up of celluloid toys. And most of those are about 100 years old, by the way. You know, they're quite old. I like using old materials because they've sort of been tested and proven in their time. And the other 2 parts that I consider anyhow is this large part here with the image from an old Life magazine. And there's a little girl and her friend looking at the scene about to be bombed. And the third part is the construction here, this grid, and these little birds. They're not like bowerbirds, but there are such things. It's called bowerbirds, which has my last name. And they build little structures to attract females. So I've always been interested in birds, and in particularly those that make interesting nests or constructions. So there are three stories going on. One is the celluloid ducks and swans, the scene of disaster, and then the building. So I begin to put together a kind of poetry of the three different kinds of things that you might experience in looking at this. And I'd like to thank the Norris for the show and the opportunity to show my work. Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Dorisco. Some people also know me as Lisa, but Elizabeth is my art name. I recently got my MFA from the School of the Art Institute. That's 2018. That's so many years after my BFA. We were talking about mediums and what medium do I prefer to work in, and the answer is all of them. I like to do all the things, and I would like to do them all now. Except for maybe acrylic. I have been painting a little bit in acrylic, trying to avoid the toxicity that happens like when you're working with oil paint. But gosh, I took out the oil this summer and oh, I love it so. Cranked out a number of oil paintings, fixed the ones from grad school that I did in acrylic that were not working quite right. Yeah, it's a joy to be able to do this. This is a painting of my grandson. It's done in oil on canvas. It's from a photo that I took a number of years ago. I was so intrigued by this look that he does often, that look of, it's not necessarily judgment, but it's assessing what is going on. We have made a couple trips to art museums, which is hard because they live far away, but I do admire like how he looks at things with that critical eye. I was hoping to imbue the work with a warmth. There's things you cannot say because you're far away, or maybe you just don't have words. But I was hoping that like the love that I have and the warmth that I feel for this person like comes out in the work. So my grandson and my other grandsons, I do draw them from photos, but sometimes with family members and even with friends, it's, I don't render them as people. It's very private, like the feelings that I have for my family and my friends, and I want to treat them with utmost respect. So sometimes in other paintings, I portray them as rabbits or other little animal icons that I hide in paintings and drawings. And my children know that they're there, and somebody else looking at that might not. Artistic influences, David Bowie. Oh my God. So David Bowie, like working in like a number of different styles, like through his whole life, like right up until he dies, like incredible. I want that. I want to be able to shift gears often and as much as I can. Maybe I should talk about Prince. Prince, that was my phone. Oh, like, so Prince not wanting to take the name that was given him and instead like adopt this like weird character. Yeah, I'm a fan. And then I should have somebody from art history because I would always do that as an art teacher. Joseph Beuys. Okay, also he's got those rabbit things going on. But, and also that work with materials figures in, like the materials start to say the thing before you even begin the project. So Joseph Beuys saying, everyone is an artist. I address my classes all, hello artists. Everybody has this creative agency to say the thing that they can't say in the usual way. You have the means to deliver that unique message that might be the thing, oh God, it's too much to say, like might be the thing that would change the world, but it might be the thing that could change and save the world. But it might be the thing that could change and save the world.
Hi, my name is Tony Armendariz, and I am here to talk about my painting, Modern Man. that was included into this year's Vicinity show here at the Norris Gallery. I began with this painting a few years ago as a result of a group of shots I took in Cuba. That's where I found this gentleman, talking to a group of folks, and I saw him and I thought, what a presence. I gotta take his picture. The title Modern Man actually refers to something a little different. My career, my professional career, began back in the 80s working in advertising, doing newspaper ads and things like that, and as a graphic artist, or a commercial artist, what we used to call them. And a lot of the guys running the ad agency were leftovers from the old Mad Men era, you know, the 3 martini lunches and the happy hours and the afternoon socials with pizza and beer. We still had that. And, you know, that was part of the atmosphere back then. Years later, as I got out of, you know, working as a commercial artist and switched over to fine arts, I began painting, all in watercolor, by the way, painting, well, things that I was familiar with, you know, cityscapes, architectural landscapes, things like that. Well, until several years ago, I began transferring to doing some more figurative work, portraiture, such as this. So, went down to Cuba, took some pictures, found this gentleman, thought, yeah, look at these features, look at those colors. And I figured, well, after doing a little compositing in Photoshop, working up a graphite sketch, what I usually do for most of my paintings, I thought, okay, I gotta make him large. This guy is huge, 30 by 40. And as you can see, I made him a silhouette. No need for a background, not a recognizable background. He's all about attitude. He's all about, well, he's a contemporary styled young man. Only changes I really made were in some of the coloration of his bandana. I decided not to make him a straightforward portrait. I wanted a more contemporary feel. So I wrapped around, I enveloped him in this shaft of light that comes over his shoulders and drips down onto his shirt. Left in the sunglasses. You don't need to see his eyes because everything else tells you all you need to know about him. Now, as I worked out the title for this, I thought, yeah, he's a contemporary man, but he's today's modern man. And I was reminded of, when I thought of modern man, I was reminded of the old evolutionary graphic that we used to see in educational material and advertising. You know, the one of the little simian that grows into, you know, he goes from ape, dark ape to, you know, Cro-Magnon man, and then suddenly he's an executive with a suit, a white guy, and it's like, that's typical old Mad Men type stuff. So I thought, well, Mad Men, your day is over. This is today's modern man. I'd like to thank the Norris Gallery for picking this painting for inclusion into the show. And I'd also like to thank judges Georgia Schwinder and Jamie Fowler for selecting it for an award. Thank you very much.
My name is Denise B, and I am a painter, a printmaker, and drawing combination artist. I've been working in this media for a good number of years. I received my MFA from Northern Illinois University, and I taught studio art and art history at Morton College in Cicero. The piece that is presented in the Norris show is print as well as a drawing. So it's a mixed media piece. And it started with a print that I did of large organic shapes that would be the bright color, spots of color that you see in the background there. And then I worked on top of that with drawing inks, and I tried to work with organic material that informs my work. So a number of different plant materials like the Savoy cabbage leaf or the orchids or incidental seeds or pods that I collect and I use in the background. I really like to draw, and so the contour line drawing is an informative part of my work. I don't want to be so descriptive that it looks like a photograph, but I like it more to be an interpretation of the shapes and the patterns that I find in the natural materials. I like the color black, and I think that's a very strong effect and contrast with some of the other prints or patterns or textures that are a part of the piece. The composition flows so that it isn't one object in the center of the composition, but it has the multiple pieces as they float around the objects and the other textures that are going to be used. When I make a mistake, I cover it with some of the paint, as I did in here. It's not necessarily a mistake, but overworked. And so I just whited it out with the print shapes, and then could apply the colored pencil and the inks to create the more vivid shapes that I wanted to program or I wanted to stress. There's a repetition of shapes so that one orchid is repeated a number of times, or that cabbage leaf is repeated a number of times, so that you can create a natural rhythm with the pieces. I'd like to thank the Norris Center and the Cultural Arts Center for having this show, sponsoring this show, and I'm really pleased to be a part of the exhibit.
My name is Bob Wilson. I have the entry that's called Pandemic Diptych. It's about isolation and masking. Both of these projects together were originally done separately, but during I like to say the height of the pandemic, but the pandemic, as everyone knows, is going on probably just as much now as it was 6 months ago. Throughout my total career, as far as working with clay, which I've done for over 50 years, I've many times done sculptural pieces only. I've also done functional pieces only, but these two pieces that are in the entry are, I'd call them hybrid. They kind of go between the sculptural and the functional. In other words, they're lidded jars, and they can be used for storage, storage of pasta, rice, cookies would be great. But these subject matter has, throughout my whole career, has really dealt with topical things that affected my life, and most of the time people in America, as opposed to pandemic, which is worldwide. I like to think that my pots, my hybrid pots, are very thoughtful, or cause you to be reflective and thoughtful about your own, how you've been affected yourself. And as we all realize that people have been not only had the COVID, but also have lost loved ones and family members and friends, as I have, to this incredible but terrible pandemic that we're going through. Other things, as far as just clay in general, being a teacher of clay for 37 years at the high school level, I would try and also encourage students to not just do plates and cups and bowls and so on, but to kind of push their imagination forward. The fact that I was teaching in an art department with 8 different art teachers, having 8 of us, I wanted to feel like I was teaching art. I wasn't just teaching craft, I wasn't just teaching pottery, so my classes were always just labeled as ceramics. And fortunately I had, that's when I ended teaching, that's all I taught. But some of the things that I would emphasize to the students is the whole idea of things that ceramics can can accomplish that other medias can't. And of course, one of the obvious ones is it can be three-dimensional. You can view it from all sides. One of the things that I feel commercially is done kind of in a harmful way to the American public is we tend to know that if we look at one side of a cup or a vase, the other side is going to look exactly the same. To an artist that is dealing with sculpture, you're thinking in the round. You're thinking about how the viewer can see, I shouldn't even call it sides, but they can see the piece from this view and this view and this view as they walk around. And even with functional pots, it's as an artist, you want the person to move, to see more than one side, especially if there is more to offer. So you're thinking about ways and tricks to create lines or rhythms or patterns around the piece to get that movement. So with clay, I usually have worked with stoneware, but with functional pieces I use mostly porcelain. But with the two pieces, the pandemic pieces, they're actually high-fire stoneware, and they have a rich, earthy tan brown to them. And by using stains on textured areas, you can, as a viewer, you can kind of appreciate the material itself. And the figures that are there have also colored slips or colored clay to color them, as opposed to using glazes. And again, glazes so often make surfaces flat, whereas the figures seem to be so appropriate to have dry and more, I suppose, realistic human kind of surfaces to them. I want to take a moment to thank the Cultural and Norris Center for the Lester Norris Award, and I am very humbled by knowing that I got the Best of Show award, and I don't take that honor lightly.